day, handsome, gorgeous listeners, and good afternoon, Philippines. This is Sining.
This is Saliksik.
It's Sining Saliksik, where you listen, we talk. I am presenter Rose.
And your co-presenter, Angel Abilio.
Welcome to Sining Saliksik.
Allow me to introduce my fellow presenters. Miss Ablaza.
Kablaaw.
Miss Taguba.
Annyeong.
Miss Supnet.
Bonjour.
Miss Nicolas.
Kalo Apoyevna.
And lastly, Mr. Tapiador.
Buenos dias.
So under historical development, we will tackle a specific primitive art, classical art, and medieval art. Beginning with the genesis of prehistoric art, what does it mean and how did it emerge? So back in the old gold days, our ancestors had one of communicating verbally. Kasi noong unang panahon, wala pa namang reading and writing na subject, wala pang mga English teachers, and hindi pa na-imbento yung mga technologies. So ang kanilang way of delivering information ay through art, lalo na yung tinatawag nilang cave art or cave painting. So cave art simply means the art of Paleolithic humans represented by drawings and paintings on the walls of caves. So Paleolithic humans, ito yung mga taong nanirahan sa mga kuweba. Ang purpose ng cave art is to portray a story or to record known history. There are 5 kinds of cave art. An example of this is the Cueva de las Manos, which is located at Patagonia, southern part of Argentina. So it is dated 13,000 and 9,000 years. So sa handprints, there is a research na nagsasabing na most mga babae. So siguro yung mga kababaihan na ninuno natin noon ay na-bored kaya nagpaint sila. Dito naman sa abstract science, tinatawag nilang non-representational, in which it portrays things from the visible world that plays little or no part. Ang halimbawa naman nito ay ang Red Cow and Frieze Chinese Horse painting, which is located at Lacoste Cave in France, estimated up to 20,000 years old. And animals represent the fauna that humans have encountered at that time. Next, figurative painting. Ang halimbawa naman nito ay ang cattle-like painting. It is dated to a minimum of 40,000 years ago and located or found in Borneo, Indonesia. Next is the rock engraving or engraving. So dito naman sa rock engraving, they made use of sharp objects to create an art. An example of this is the small horses. Matatagpuan din siya sa Lacoste Cave at it is dated 20,000 years old. And lastly is the relief sculpture. Dito sa relief sculpture, yung raw materials or yung rock na mismo yung ginagamit nila para mag-form ng isang art. Example of this is the Bimbetka rock shelters. It is found in rock deserts. It depicts a horse on the left and a bison or boar on the right, which with characteristics of both species. Dated up to 9,000 before present to 17,000 before present. So meron din tayong iba't ibang katangian ng cave painting. Let us proceed with the characteristics. Una, cave painting involves the application of pigment on the walls, floors, or ceilings of ancient rock dwellings inhabited by prehistoric men. Pangalawa, most of the prehistoric cave paintings were figures of animals. Figures of animals dahil ang ating mga ninuno noon ay fan ng pangangaso. Next characteristic, cave art is characterized by age. Yes, it's the age that makes it
Prehistoric. And
lastly, it is characterized by the material used. Ang example po ng mga materials na ginamit noon ay mga charcoals, ash, pigments, stone, or woods. Now, let us proceed to Stone Age. Prehistoric cultural stage or level of human development that was characterized by the creation and use of stone tools. Merong tatlong major subdivision under Stone Age. Number 1 is the Paleolithic period or Old Stone Age. Next slide, please. So para madaling i-identify ang Old
Stone Age,
yung mga tao sa panahon na to ay very dependent sa kanilang kapaligiran. Back to the previous slide. Kasi ito yung kanilang source of food, yung kanilang environment. Mayroon ding tinatawag na nomadical style. Nomadical style, ibig sabihin, palipat-lipat sila ng tinitirhan. And last way to identify Paleolithic era is that they have what they call the hunter-gatherer culture, na kung saan yung mga kalalakihan, sila yung mga mangangaso, at yung mga kababaihan naman, sila yung nangongolekta ng mga pagkain. Old Stone Age or Paleolithic has three kinds, namely the upper, middle, and lower. Let us compare the three. Kapag sinabing upper, dito nag-start yung emergence ng tinatawag nilang regional stone tool industry such as the Perigordian, Aurignacian, and Solotrian, and Magdalenian. So Upper Paleolithic is the oldest known cultures of the New World. Next naman is the Middle Paleolithic, na kung saan ang mga gamit nila ay mga flake tools at nagsimula na din yung widespread use of fire, this Middle Paleolithic. So, about 250,000 to 30,000 years ago. And last is the Lower Paleolithic o kung tawagin ay Early Stone Age. It is currently believed to have lasted from between about 2.7 million years ago to 200,000 years ago. Another period is the Mesolithic or known as Middle Stone Age. Ang pagkakakilanlan naman dito sa Mesolithic ay yung mga tools na ginamit. Ito yung mga paggamit nila ng mga small chip stone tools, which is called microliths, and the retouched bladelets. So ito yung dalawang key factor to identify the Mesolithic. Number one, the use of microliths, and number two, the retouched bladelets. And the last period will be the Neolithic Age. Other term for New Stone Age. So noong pagod na yung ating mga ninuno sa nomadical style, way of living, and dun sa hunter-gatherer culture, dito naman sa Neolithic, nag-start na yung mga taong magsaka and na-develop na din yung mga advanced technologies like palakol and mga arrowheads. So again, there are three major subdivisions of Stone Age, namely
the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. Let's proceed.
about the significance of prehistoric art in us. It's not indicated in the PowerPoint, so kindly just listen. So una, as part of millennial era, for me, through understanding prehistoric art, we are enabling ourselves to fully understood yung way of living ng ating mga ninuno. Halimbawa na lang kanina, di ba nalaman natin na yung kanilang paraan pala ng pakikipag-communicate ay
Through cave art.
so that's all about prehistoric art. Now let us move on to Philippine primitive art to be discussed to us by Mr. Giovanni.
Primitive art refers to the cultural artifacts of primitive peoples or ethnic groups considered to have a relatively low level of technological development by Western standards. Primitive art is the art of societies that are primitive typologically rather than chronologically, because of the strong influence of violence and intimidation, which bend the people to their will and thus left a country hungry for its own identity. The Philippines, as a colony of Spain, the United States, and Japan, saw the decline and destruction of its ancient costumes and traditions. Ang cause po ng pagbabago ng art at ating kultura is because of colonization of other countries, such as Spanish, Japanese, and American. Halimbawa ang mga Espanyol, naimpluwensyahan nila tayo when it comes to music, sa harana, kundiman, at saka rondalya. Kagaya ngayon, maraming Pilipino pa rin ang gumagamit ng mga instruments such as guitar, ganun po. Moving on to the definition of Philippine primitive art.
Definition of Philippine primitive art. Para sa survival at kaligtasan ng ating mga ninuno. Primitive art is another term ng mga walang formal na pagsasanay. Ngunit ayon sa kasaysayan, ito ay mas madalas na ginagamit sa trabaho mula sa ilang kultura. Arts created were not yet developed and the society is not yet progressive. Moving on.
Wait lang, pakibalik po sa characteristics. Characteristics of Philippine primitive art. Um, it it is made up of raw materials like tree extracts, fruits, and vegetables. Second, it can be found in caves, trees, and forests. Number three, it is form of sculpture in stone, ivory, bone, and wood. Ang karaniwang pinangukit po noon ay galing sa nature like mga bato and kahoy. Moving on to the next slide.
Examples of primitive art. Ang first ay, next please. First ay Agono petroglyphs. Located in the municipality of Binangonan, Rizal. It was accidentally founded by national artist Carlos Botong Francisco with a troop of Boy Scouts during a field trip in 1965. Highly significant cultural landmarks because it is the oldest known art in the Philippines. Na-include din siya sa National Cultural Treasure of our country at sa World Inventory of Rock Art. Human and animal ang naka-engrave sa rock wall na gawa sa volcanic tuff. Second slide po. The Alab Mountain Province. Carving on boulders on top of cliffs, dating was placed at not earlier than 1500 BC. Alab Mountain. Hindi matukoy, walang tumpak na tools para ma-decode at mabigyang kahulugan ang mga sinaunang marka na nakaukit sa ibabaw ng isang malaking bato na matatagpuan sa isang promontoryo. However, may teorya at alamat. Kagaya ng sabi sa slide, ang carbon dating has calculated the age of these petroglyphs. They have been carved sometime not earlier than 1500 BC, so that would be 3000 plus years old. Next. Petrographs in Peña Blanca, Cagayan Province. Charcoal drawing on cave walls. Petrographs in Peña Blanca, Cagayan, Calao Limestone Formation, Paleolithic Archaeological Site. Isa sa mga kilalang landmark at tourist spot ng lalawigan. It is also formed to the charcoal drawn Peña Blanca Petrographs. Peña Blanca Petrographs at ang Calao Limestone Formation ay kasama bilang pansamantalang mga site ng Pilipinas para sa future inclusion in the UNESCO World Heritage Art. Formation has at least 93 archaeological sites that shielded stone tools ng industriyang Paleolitiko at mga buto at shell ng mga hayop na mayroon pa rin sa lugar. Next. Petrographs in Anda Peninsula, Bohol. Red hematite prints dating of this is still undetermined. Ang mga unang naninirahan sa lugar ay mga migranteng Negrito, eventually replaced by Austronesians coming from Butuan. Itinatag ng mga bagong migrante ang pulang hematite petrographs sa peninsula ng Anda at naging sagradong lugar para sa mga etnikong komunidad. Next would be the significance of primitive art, Philippine primitive art. Next, Philippine primitive significance. The significance of the Philippine primitive arts provides a means about people's perceptions in the past, how they draw abstract lines and shapes, and what are the materials they use to make an art. It is the legacy of our ancestors to us on how they live in the past. And in that case, we are learning from it, and we have the ideas on how they live by studying itself. My colleague will explain the following slide. Ms. Taguba and Ms. Nicolas, your turn.
Thank you, Miss Supnet. So let's have another look back to the past because we will be dealing with classical period encompassing different composers with their composed music. To start with a short description on how classical period emerged. Classical refers to the art and architecture of ancient Greece and Rome. People in Europe this time began to become interested again in the neat lines and orderly style that the classical world was famous for. Music during the classical period became less decorative and complex than Baroque music because composers were trying to imitate the simple and elegant classic styles that became popular in Europe. During this classical period, much like the previous periods, the classical period was one of change in Europe, and thus music, art, and architecture changed along with it. The dates of the classical period in Western music are generally accepted as being between about 1750 and 1820. However, the term classical music is used in colloquial sense as a synonym for Western art music, which describes a variety of Western musical style from the 9th century to the present, and especially from the 16th or 17th to the 19th. This article is about the specific period from 1730 to 1820. We will now move forward to the next slide. The classical period falls between the Baroque and Romantic period. Classical music has a lighter, clearer texture than Baroque music and is less complex. It is mainly homophonic, using a clear melody line over a subordinate chordal accompaniment. But counterpoint was by no means forgotten, especially later in the period. It also makes use of style gallant, which emphasize light elegance in place of the Baroque's dignified seriousness and impressive grandeur. Variety and variety and contrast within a piece became more pronounced than before, and the orchestra increased in size, range, and power. May I call on Ismaila Taguba to discuss the next slide.
These are the characteristics of classical music. First, emphasis on elegance and balance. Short, well-balanced melodies and clear-cut question and answer phrases. Mainly simple diatonic harmony, mainly homophonic texture, melody plus accompaniment, but with some use of counterpoint, where two or more melodic lines are combined. Last, use of contrasting mood. Moving on to the next slide. Example of classical artists. First artist was Joseph Haydn or Franz Joseph Haydn, 1732 to 1809. He was an Australian composer, one of the most prolific and prominent composer of the classical period. Haydn wrote 107 symphonies in total, as well as 18 string quartets, 45 piano trios, 62 piano sonatas, 14 masses, and 26 operas, amongst countless other scores. Next artist will be Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770 to 1827. One of the most significant and influential composer of the Western art music traditions. He oversaw the transition of music from classical style full of poise and balance to romantic style, characterized by emotion and impact. He was a groundbreaker in all senses of the great musical innovators on his time. He wrote 9 symphonies, 32 piano sonatas, 1 opera, 5 piano concertos, and many chamber works. He could be a difficult and unsociable man who felt bitter and isolated by the deafness which developed in his 20s. Now moving on to next slide.
Johannes Chrysostomus Mozart, from 1756 to 1791, was arguably the most gifted musician in the history of classical music. His inspiration is often described as divine, but he worked assiduously not only to become the great composer he was, but also a conductor, organist, and violinist. Mozart's art Mozart's music embraces opera, symphony, concerto, chamber, choral, instrumental, and vocal music, revealing an astonishing number of imperishable masterpieces. Moving on to the next slide.
Next, the significance. Classical music express our civilization deepest sentiments. Composers use music to depict the society and eras they live in. Through music, you can learn about another generation, brilliance, and accomplishments. Playing or listening to classical music has a wide variety of benefits. Both playing and listening to music can be a great stress reliever. It has been proven that playing any type of music can increase a person's intelligence. This is due to the fact that music can relate to so many other academic subjects. Moving on to medieval period, may I call the next reporters.
So good afternoon, everyone. Now we will discussing about the medieval period. Medieval art period encompasses over 1,000 years of art history in Europe and spans a wide range of times and places. Medieval art, which began with the fall of the Roman Empire and ended in the early 14th century, was hugely influential period in Western culture at the time.
So in addition to that, because of the length of time involved, many innovations and one-of-a-kind artifacts were created during the medieval Impressionist movement, with this artistic influence approaching Western Asia and Northern Africa as well. The Middle Ages were a period in European history that lasted from the implosion of Roman civilization in the 5th century CE to the Renaissance. Medieval art, which encompasses a wide range of art and architecture, refers to the Middle Ages, which lasted roughly from the Roman conquest in 476 AD to the present day. Next po. So now let's talk about the definition. Medieval art, which emerged in Northern Europe following the fall of the Roman Empire, encompassed some of the most significant art movement patterns and periods in history. So medieval art was made up of various artistic mediums such as sculpture, illuminated manuscripts, stained glass, tapestries, mosaics, and metalworks. Iconography, Christian subject matter, elaborate patterns and decoration, bright colors, the use of precious metals, gems, and other luxurious materials, stylized figures, and social status ay ilan lamang sa mga defining characteristics of early medieval art. Ang early medieval art ay labis na naimpluwensyahan ng tatlong pangunahing pinagmumulan at ito ay ang Christianity, the classical world of Rome, and the pagan North. The subject matter of early medieval art, which frequently depicts religious figures and scenes, was heavily influenced by Christianity. Artworks created during the medieval period became famous for their use of important and valuable materials, which became a requiring feature of era. Next po.
Now we are moving to the characteristics of medieval art. First is the iconography. Iconography, as a branch of art history, studies the identification, description, interpretation of the content of image. Next is bright color. A bright color is strong, noticeable, and not dark. It is used to generate emotions, create unity, and make something stand out, and generally create a visual interest. Next characteristics is religious icons represent. Icons are considered an essential part of the church and are given special liturgical veneration. When we say liturgical veneration, ito ay isang pagsamba na nagsasangkot ng pagsamba na isinasagawa sa isang pampublikong lugar. Sa pangkalahatan sa panahon ng isang serbisyo sa simbahan at sumusunod sa isang set ng istruktura. Para sa mga Katoliko, ang serbisyo ng Eucharistia na kilala rin bilang misa ay lalong mahalaga. Ito ay nagsisilbing reenactment ng huling hapunan ni Jesus kasama ang kanyang mga disipulo. Moving on to the examples of medieval arts. First is the Lamentation, the Mourning of Christ by Giotto de Bondon. Giotto de Bondon was of the most notable artists from the medieval period. He was known simply as Giotto and created a large collection of religious work that focused on life of Christ as well as those of the apostles. So, ito si God, Jesus Christ, and ito yung mga 12 disciples. His famous painting Lamentation, The Mourning of Christ, is the most recognized work from medieval era and features the moments of immediately after Christ's death before he was laid to rest in tomb. The 1306 work is featured on north wall of Crovegni Chapel, which is located in Padua, Italy. Giotto is credited with influencing many other artists who would go on from the origins of Renaissance period, which also greatly emphasized Christian paintings. This particular work features the deceased Christ shortly after he was removed from the cross. Many of notable figures from the account recorded in the New Testament are represented, including his mother, Mary, as well as other women such as Mary Magdalene. Ang partikular na gawaing ito ay nagtatampok sa namatay na si Kristo sa ilang sandali matapos siyang maalis sa krus. Marami sa mga kilalang tao mula sa salaysay ay nakatala sa bagong tipan ang naroroon, kabilang ang kanyang inang si Maria, gayon din ang iba pang kababaihan tulad nilang si Maria Magdalena. Next example is Wilton Diptych. The Wilton Diptych is one of the most highly revered and mysterious works from medieval times. The painting is featured on small diptych, which is 2 panels. So yan, dalawa sila. That were designed to form a portable painting that could be easily transported and protected. The particular artist who painted the Wilton Diptych is unknown, although most art historians and critics believe it was an English or French painter. The work was known to have been completed in 1399, just as the medieval period was coming to an end. It was painted for King Richard II of England, who is depicted as kneeling before the Holy Virgin. Siya ata ito, kasi siya yung nakanil. Which are featured on the right diptych panel. So siya si King Richard II of England. The Virgin Mary and Infant Jesus are depicted as being surrounded by angels who are garbed in a blue robes. So ito yung mga naka-blue robes. And here are the angels, which was a symbol of righteousness in medieval times. The diptych is made of Baltic oak and remains in remarkable condition of National Gallery in London. King Richard II is seen surrounded by 3 prominent figures, and ito sila yung tatlo, from Christian theology and English royalty as John the Baptist Edward, the Confessor, and Edmund Martyr are each standing over him. Next example is the Jan altarpiece, Herbert and John van Eyck. One of the best-known medieval paintings to come from the Dutch region is Herbert and Jan van Eyck's painting that is a complex compilation of poly-pitched panels that each feature a notable figure or event from Christian New Testament Bible as well as the Old Testament. The panels are arranged into vertical aligned. So vertical to, dalawa to guys. Ito yung nasa upper and ito yung nasa baba. Aligned layouts that can be folded outward and arranged in unique pattern. The work is credited to two prominent Flemish brothers who produced a number of prestigious artworks during this time period. Herbert and John Eyck were known have painted a number of other religious theme works that featured various senses from the Bible, but none would gain as much praises as this 1432 work. The upper register, so here is the upper. The upper register of panels feature scene focus on heavenly redemption, while the second, here's the second, register feature as collection of clergy angels with two sculptures of John the Baptist and the John Evangelist. The presentation in the temple. Okay, wala ito. Next is the Gothic of CA 1200 to 1500. To the non-expert eye, it can be difficult to distinguish between Byzantine, Carolingian, Ottonian, and Romantic sculpture. Gothic sculpture, on the other hand, stands clearly apart thanks to striking new degree of physical realism. Indeed, Gothic art embodies the transition from medieval stylization to the fully developed realism of the Renaissance. The Gothic age witnessed the written statues, and the principal sculpture type Gothic statues are still usually architectural ornaments. However, independent freestanding statues would not be. The Gothic age witnessed the return of statues as the principal sculpture type. Gothic statues are still usually architectural ornaments. However, independent freestanding statue would not be revived until the Renaissance. Indeed, given that freestanding statues have been worshipped by the pagan Greeks and Romans, they were firmly discouraged by the medieval church. Moving on. Next is the Dante the Divine Comedy. Dante Divine Comedy, composed in the early 14th century, Dante's Divine Comedy is a trilogy of poems charting the poet's journey from the hell inferno through a purgatory or purgatorio to heaven paradiso, guided by his fellow poet Virgil, featuring lakes of fifth and 14 demons. It's much more fun that its theological subject might suggest and influence the whole raft of latter poets, especially T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. It's even been called the fifth gospel. So clearly and effectively does Dante detail the medieval view of Christianity. Now may I call on Miss Ablaza to continue the topic.
Thank you so much, Miss Obilio. So now let's talk about Opus Anglicanum. Latin for English work, the phrase Opus Anglicanum was first coined in the 13th century to describe the highly prized and luxurious embroideries made in England of silk and gold and silver thread, teaming the elaborate imagery. The V&A holds the largest collection of these works in the world, incredible survivals from a celebrated period of English artistic production. Mag-e-end na naman ni.
Ala, Sige, go.
True.
Wait lang. Ikat. Go na, go muna.
Saglit. Sige. Wait lang, di ba ikaw na magbabasa dito?
Asan ka na?
The Alhambra Palace Complex. The Alhambra Palace Complex is the epitome of Moorish architecture in Iberia, constructed in the mid-13th century in the Emirate of Granada. Alhambra essentially incorporates most of the defining features of Moorish architecture. The palace complex occupies a huge place and includes residential quarters, fortifications around the boundaries, sizable country yards and fountains in the interior, lavishly embellished carvings, and Arabics all over the walls and window panels, and the extensive use of the iconic Moorish muqarnas. Most of the original architecture and decorations of Alhambra are intact to this day.
So before we're moving into the local examples of medieval art, medieval influence also the Philippines. Ang Pilipinas ay sinakop ng mga Kastila. Ang paraan ng pamumuhay ng mga Pilipino, kabilang ang kultura, kaugalian at sining ay malaki impluwensya at pinilit na binago. Malapit nang magwakas ang panahon ng medieval nang magsimulang sakupin ang mga Kastila, ang Pilipinas, ngunit ang sining ng medieval ay sumaklaw at umunlad pa rin. Malakas ang impluwensya ng estilo ng sining medieval sa lungsod ng Maynila. So mamaya meron po tayong mga examples na makikita sa sinasabi dito. Particular ang Intramuros dahil naging sentro ito ng kalakalan at kabisera ng tipikal na Old Manila na bahay na nagtataglay ng mga tambok na inspirasyon na pare-parehong Asian European. So maraming na impluwensya sa Pilipinas noong panahon ng medieval period. Even though medieval did not stay in Europe, that Spaniards still continued to artistically align the church style using during the medieval era. Romance and Gothic style were used to in famous churches like Manila Cathedral and San Sebastian Church. So here are some local examples during the medieval art po. So here is this example, the Intramuros. Old World Intramuros is home to Spaniard era landmarks like Fort Santiago with a large stone gate and shrine to the national hero Jose Rizal. The Omit Manila Cathedral houses bronze carvings and stained glass windows, and while San Agustin Church Museum has religious artwork and statues, Spanish colonial furniture and art fill Casa Manila Museum, and horse-drawn carriages or calesa ply the areas of cobblestone street. Next is now may I call on Miss Ablasa to continue the topic?
So maitle a Laratier, paintings and sculpture in medieval art form were rarely practiced and seen even during the Spanish colonization. There are still some Filipino artists that do it. So maitre means a person regarded as a master or model in art or profession. With the version of maitre a Laratier, which is Basi Revolt, Esteban Villanueva has its own version of it, and it called Basi Revolt that he finished in 1821. And that is the Basi Revolt.
So here's the end of our discussion. Thank you for listening. Also, added to that is the significance of medieval art. It demonstrates how the Christian and Catholic faiths were expressed through a love of art and the idealistic ideas. Their architectural design and interior decor were tes- testament to the people of the Middle Ages' deep religious faith. Thank you for listening. Don't hesitate to ask to any questions. Thank you, everyone.